Greetings aspirants. Welcome to Narayan IAS. Welcome to this new edition of Daily News Analysis. In this session of Daily News Analysis, we have picked up certain important articles from Hindu as well as Indian Express, and we will be dwelling into the detailed analysis of these particular topics. Before getting into the discussion over the topics, I have one request for you all. Please make sure that you are hitting the bell icon that you are seeing below and remain subscribed to our channel Narayana IAS, the one-stop destination for all of your UPSC examination requirements. We shall now move to the articles that we have chosen for today's analysis. The first article that we have chosen is from the Hindu, where it is talking about this implementation of Armed Forces Special Powers Act, titled Government Extends AFSPA in Parts of Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, published on page number 12. Moving to the next article, it is from the Indian Express, where it is talking about bank credit to industry, where it is showing certain patterns, published on page number 15. The third article is again from the Indian Express, titled The Deflator Problem, where we know that deflator as such is going to give you the relationship between the nominal GDP and real GDP. Here the deflator, which is a combination of what is referred to as consumer price index and wholesale price index, according to this article, must be revised in such a way that there is a rational outcome out of these particular data that we generate in the form of real GDP and nominal GDP, published on page number 11. The fourth article is again from the Indian Express, which we will try to look into in terms of mains perspective, titled Taking on Big Tech, where this competition within this digital economy is seemingly challenged by all these big tech companies such as Google. The last article is from the Hindu, titled The Countdown to a Pandemic Treaty, published on page number 8. It is looking into one of the far-reaching consequences that this might bring about if that comes into fruition, such that the entire global health governance can be monitored with lot of coordination and cooperation. Lastly, at the end, we also have certain practice questions which we will try to look into. Dear students, embark on your UPSC journey with Narayana IAS Academy. Our esteemed 5-year and 3-year integrated programs are now open for admissions in Hyderabad, Vijayawada and Nellore. Our courses include robust R&D backed initiatives such as daily news analysis, daily news review, which are comprehensive review program for a broader understanding of our day-to-day happenings, which are current affairs. Similarly, we have NCERT program, which is a foundational course that covers all the NCERT syllabi, which is crucial for UPSC preparation. We also have a mentorship program for personalized guidance, and we also have a regular test series for systematic learning and assessment of the student. So begin your journey to become a leader with Narayana IAS Academy today. Embark on this journey, make your dream come into a reality with Narayana IAS Academy. Let's now move into the first article for today's analysis. We'll look into some of the prelims details related to this particular article, where government has extended what is referred to as Armed Forces Special Powers Act in some parts of Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh. We'll look into its details. As you see, this particular article is important from the GS paper 3 internal security point of view for the mains examination, and also for prelims examination. This is important from what is referred to as current affairs of national and international importance. We'll look into its details. Look at this previous year question. Asked in 2015, human rights activists constantly highlight the fact that the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958, that is AFSPA, is a draconian act leading to cases of human rights abuses by security forces. What sections of AFSPA are opposed by the activists critically evaluate the requirement with reference to the view held by the apex court. Asked in 2015, this clearly shows that this article is in tune with your UPSC Civil Service examination requirement. Look at this context. As you saw, the Union Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the nodal agency to implement this particular law, referred to as the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, has been extended in parts of Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh, whereby this extension is for a time period of another 6 months. What you see about AFSPA is that this was in fact enacted in 1942 as an ordinance in response to what is called as the Quit India movement during the freedom struggle. In this ordinance has given the armed forces a license to kill, what is referred to as the shoot at sight possibility, as a provision. So, as a colonial law, it was drawn against the natives. This is what we have to keep in mind, where this is possible whenever there is so-called quote and unquote internal disturbances. Now, how will you define internal disturbance? Again, that lies in the hands of the one who is sitting as an authority in that particular place, particularly to maintain law and order and security. This makes this particular law or colonial law very much subjective. This again you have to keep in mind. And this was initially applied to the 7 northeastern states of Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland and Tripura. As you know that, as I have already pointed out, the nodal agency to implement this is Home Ministry, and AFSPA is as of now active in Assam, Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, where in Manipur except Imphal, in most of the state it is being implemented, including this Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, moving ahead, what you have is that this particular Armed Forces Special Powers Act, as you see here in Assam, similarly in Manipur and also in Kashmir, it is in total implementation, and there are few states where it is partially implemented. For example, in Arunachal Pradesh and also in Jammu and Ladakh, this is being partially implemented. Moreover, in few states such as Tripura, this has been clearly repealed, including Punjab, where in 1997 it has been repealed. So, this implementation of this particular law has been seen. The one fundamental aspect of this particular law is that it also uses certain provisions of what is referred to as Disturbed Areas Act, which defines what is called as disturbed area. According to this disturbed area, which is declared as an area where there are differences or disputes between members of different religious, racial, linguistic or regional groups or castes or communities. So, on the basis of this, they can define that particular area as a disturbed area. Now, who can declare it as a disturbed area? The union government or the governor of any state or even the administrator of the union territory can declare that entire part of territory or the whole of territory, including whether it is a state or union territory, as a disturbed area. Again, as I said, this makes it very subjective. Moreover, there are few powers after declaration of this disturbed area in the hands of security agencies. One, there is power to fire and kill anyone, whereby as you declare this disturbed area, as I said, you have the right to kill, which has been granted to the armed forces and also the central armed forces or police forces, which are deployed in the specified disturbed area, which is what in fact is one section which has been critically criticized by the independent thinkers. Second, we have what is called as arrest and detention. So, on the basis of suspicion alone, they can not only kill anyone, but they can also arrest in many cases where there is not even a requirement of any warrant. Moving ahead, you also have this power to search someone without warrant and search the premises without warrant, and also they have the protection from prosecution, meaning any particular security person who has done this is protected from prosecution. This is the most fundamental critical provision that is there in this particular law. On the other hand, they also have the right to destroy, which are in the form of arms dump or hideouts or fortified shelters, and this is another particular provision which is powerful for the security agencies. Now, once this particular law is implemented, remember it is free from judicial review, because it is seen that the security requirement is much more important than subjecting these particular provisions and the actions of the executive towards judicial review whenever there is such persisting security situation or internal security situation in the country. Moving ahead, what you have is certain amendments. In these amendments, for example, in 1972, this has given lot of powers to the central government along with the states, as I said, to declare a particular area as a disturbed area. So, as amendments, these have to be remembered for the preliminary examination. Moreover, we have to keep in mind that the Home Ministry as of now has issued this new notification where periodically it can declare what is called as a disturbed area in any particular state, whereby it can extend this Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Now, as we have already seen, this has been extended to certain parts of Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh. Moreover, this notification for extending AFSPA in Manipur and Assam has also been issued by their respective state governments, which you have to keep in mind for the preliminary examination. So, this is something about this Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which we need to discuss under this particular prelims related article. Moving to the next article, we will look into this article related to how the distribution of bank credit to various sectors of the economy is being done. RBI has released a report with regard to this, a update with regard to this, and we shall look into its details in terms of certain observed patterns. This particular article is important from Indian economy GS paper 3 point of view and also for the preliminary examination in terms of what is referred to as current affairs of national and international importance. Look at this previous year question. In India, which of the following have the highest share in the disbursement of credit to agriculture and allied activities, asked in 2011? Either commercial banks or cooperative banks or RRBs or the microfinance institutions. Looking at this question, this credit pattern is also important, particularly from the preliminary examination point of view. Look at the context. As the ministry has released this data, where the 8.6% growth in the bank credit to particularly industry compared with a growth rate of 6.8% previously was noted, and this is mainly due to accelerated pace of borrowings by sectors like infrastructure and textiles is what this particular report notes. So, as we have already seen that this infrastructure and textile sectors saw an accelerated pace of borrowing. However, agriculture and allied activities have also experienced robust credit growth at a rate which is compared to the previous year is higher, that is at 20% approximately compared to 15% in the previous financial year. Remember, the credit allocation or the data related to credit is seen in two particular fundamental columns. One is referred to as the food credit and then non-food credit. If you look at this food credit and non-food credit classification, nearly 95% of the credit in India is going towards this non-food sector within Indian economy. The food credit is hence merely at 1% and the remaining thing is going towards what is referred to as personal loans. And this personal loans is one particular segment in which there is one sector which is particularly predominant. That particular sector is the housing, including the priority sector housing. As you see this particular data, and if you look at some of the what is called as patterns which are observed, there are two fundamental things which we have to make note of. With respect to this food credit, even though there was a stagnation in between, particularly from 2016-2017 financial year to 2020-2021 financial year, post pandemic with respect to food, the credit is gradually and sustainably increasing. This is first aspect that you have to make note of. Secondly, with respect to non-food credit, you have a classification which is 4 sectoral or 4 subsectoral. One is agriculture and allied sectors. As you see that with respect to agriculture and allied sectors, the pattern is that since 2007-2008 financial year, the amount of credit that has been allocated to agriculture is gradually increasing in terms of absolute numbers. However, in terms of the percentage, its value is stagnant. This aspect that you have to make note of. Second, we have to also note that apart from agriculture, within industry, as it has already been noted, infrastructure is drawing higher rate of what is called as credit in terms of subsectoral allocation. And within this, you also have to note that the food processing industry has also been catered to thanks to what is called as production linked incentives scheme. Third one is, along with this, if you look at the classification in terms of small, medium and large enterprises, it is this small enterprises which in fact are being catered to by the state in terms of credit growth, primarily because they are job or labor intensive sectors. Within this, even large industries are being catered to with higher volumes of credit growth, and it is the medium enterprises which are in fact facing a stagnation. This is the third pattern that you have to keep in mind from the preliminary examination point of view. Third, if you look at the services trade, particularly the IT services are receiving more amount of credit growth in terms of higher credit flow towards any particular subsector. Lastly, whatever that pandemic impact which had been there over the credit growth with respect to particularly those sectors where contact is unavoidable, now even those sectors such as tourism are receiving higher credit towards those particular sectors. Lastly, we have to also keep in mind that, as I already have pointed out, personal loans is the fourth segment you have within this non-food credit, and these personal loans are largely being catered to housing sector, including the priority sector housing. These are some of the patterns that you must know. So, as I have clearly pointed out, there are three particular sectors which are consistently seeing higher credit growth. One is food processing, the second one is infrastructure, and the third one is textiles, particularly even in this particular quarter. Moving ahead, there is a deceleration in credit growth if you look at the subsectoral breakdown, particularly in basic metal and metal products and chemical products sectors. With respect to personal loans, as I have already pointed out, it has gradually increased. However, in terms of percentage, it has cooled to, as you have seen, 18% from 20% a year earlier, because there is a slowdown which has been noticed in vehicle loans and other personal loan categories. Moving ahead, we must understand what is the significance of credit growth from the mains perspective. Remember, RBI considers credit growth apart from other such parameters as one of the key high frequency indicators with respect to the performance of the Indian economy. Given this particular tag of high frequency indicator with respect to performance of the Indian economy, credit growth, whenever it is double digit growth, then it has facilitated much of economic participation of the residents either in the form of production or consumption. Second, this higher credit growth means that there is an increased trust towards not only the banking industry but also towards other such financial institutions such as NBFCs. Given the NBFC crisis that the economy has faced, this is one positive aspect that we have to make note of. Third, this also promotes what is called as accountability and governance. Fourth, this is encouraging public participation, meaning there is improved financial inclusion which has happened within the Indian economy. Fifth, this also reduces dependency on the state or what is called as elite control. Sixth, clearly credit growth is symbolic of or as an indicator of the economic growth and macroeconomic stability. Lastly, we must also keep in mind that the credit growth means it is probably leading to what is called as creation of economies of scale, where there is access to capital and this capital is being converted into investment in innovation or research and development. Second, thus on the production side, this also is an indicator of stimulation of demand creation, where either the consumer credit or the capital investment will have what is called as the multiplier effect, where this multiplier effect pushes the growth for next few years, rather than just within this particular financial year. So, the credit growth as a high frequency indicator is a symbol of the performance of the Indian economy and also performance indicator for its macroeconomic stability. We shall now move to this article related to the problem of GDP deflator. We look into its details. This article is important from the GDP deflator and real GDP or nominal GDP, which are important for your preliminary examination, and from the GS paper 2 mains examination. We may also look at some of the fundamental concerns related to measurement of growth and development in India. We shall look at this previous year question asked in 2017. Consider the following statements. One statement, tax revenue as a percentage of GDP of India has steadily increased in the last decade. Second statement, fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP of India has steadily increased in the last decade. As you look at this question, measurement of GDP and its problems are going to be important topic for your UPSC Civil Service examination. Look at this particular context. We clearly see that India's economy has reportedly grown at this 7 to 8%, as we clearly know, where India is going through her post-pandemic recovery. However, there is a debate with regard to accuracy of these particular figures, fundamentally emerging from this problem of what is called as GDP deflator. As you see in this particular figure, we know that we have measurement of inflation, and this measurement of inflation is done either through wholesale price index or through consumer price index, and we clearly know that this wholesale price index is showing a particular pattern as you see in this particular picture, and accordingly you visualize that even GDP deflator is close enough to this particular pattern again. We will see the details as to why and how this is actually occurring. Moving ahead, remember, whenever you are measuring the economic activity within an economy, we measure it either in the form of real GDP or nominal GDP or both of these. And it is this real GDP which gives you a measure of the real activity or the final output which has occurred in the economy. On the other hand, the nominal GDP will give you the production in the current financial year or final output in the current financial year at the current prices, whereas real GDP will give you the production or the output in the current financial year at the constant prices. This is the way in which we look at both real GDP and nominal GDP, and clearly you see that in both of these it is the price level which actually matters. So, both of these are related to each other by what is called as price level. The measurement of this price level is referred to as GDP deflator. Now, this GDP deflator is what in fact relates both of these, that is real GDP and nominal GDP. So, if I deflate the nominal GDP by these levels of GDP deflator, then I will be getting what is called as real GDP, which in turn will give you the measurement of output at the constant prices. Theoretically, this is what they mean. The problem with India's economy is that, as you saw recently, the government has revised the growth rates that were actually happening in the Indian economy. As they have revised these particular GDP growth rates which have happened within the Indian economy, there were concerns over the measurement. Why? As I said, it is being seen as the problem of GDP deflator. As we know, in India, GDP deflator is taken as an average of both WPI and CPI. As you see that this is an average of WPI and CPI, within WPI we have a particular concern. That concern is WPI does not take into consideration what is called as price level of services sector. As it does not take into consideration price level of services sector, as it takes into consideration only the commodities which have been subjected to the price level fluctuations, it has a particular limitation. On the other hand, we know that it is CPI which takes into consideration what is called as services sector in its particular fold. Given this, as we see that WPI is going through a situation wherein globally the commodities are seeing a deceleration in their price level, accordingly you find that even GDP deflator is also finding such deceleration in its value. On the other hand, CPI by and large is hovering between 4 to 6%, and given this we see that its role within this deceleration is limited. As you see this scenario, as you saw in the previous slide on the picture, whenever the WPI inflation is drastically coming down, given the scenario of the global commodity prices, accordingly even the GDP deflator is coming down, by which it means that real GDP which is related to nominal GDP by this measure of GDP deflator, you find that as its value is coming down, it means the value of the real GDP will go up. It gets inflated. It is this which is the prime concern as of now. The value of GDP deflator is getting deflated by more than what it actually is, because of the fact that WPI doesn't take into consideration the services that the commodities are getting through various services that they have to receive in order to get produced, and as you are not taking into consideration these, then some of the input prices have already been lost in its measurement. This is the primary concern. On the other hand, if you look at the current measurements, as this data clearly shows, the gap between real GDP and nominal GDP is narrowing. As it is narrowing, it means that the value of real GDP is getting inflated, as we see, because of the fact that WPI is in the negative zone, and hence this is also an indicator of deficiency within the measurement. Moving ahead, you have few particular issues as I already have pointed out. One, we have moved towards a methodology of GDP measurement which earlier was based on volume of production which has happened within the Indian economy, where this volume of production used to measure through what is called as index of industrial production, and this used to be based on the data that you receive from annual survey of industries. Now, by calculating this, first we used to measure the real GDP, that is we used to arrive at the near plausible correct value of real GDP, and then we used to measure what is referred to as nominal GDP using the GDP deflator. Now we are measuring nominal GDP first using the data that we are getting on the basis of this GDP deflator, and then we are trying to deflate this nominal GDP by this value of GDP deflator, and then we are arriving at the real GDP. This reversal in methodology is what the prime concern that is being seen. Second, as we already have seen, there is a GDP deflation approach which is being seen as a flawed approach. Why? As we have already seen, services is not covered by it. Second, we also have a situation wherein, unlike what you see in most of the G20 countries, where they have a standard that they will have a twin GDP deflators, one on the basis of the input prices, the other one is based on the output prices. Rather than this, India follows a single GDP deflator methodology where both of these have been combined, and as you saw in WPI, there is no inclusion of the services related price level, and given this, the price level that you see in WPI is a deficient one. It is this changed methodology and the requirement to adopt a standardized methodology which is the prime concern that we have to understand. Moving ahead, we have to hence adopt a measure wherein the measurement is being done on the basis of CPI, number one. Number two, where you have to also look at developing what is referred to as producers price index in place of this WPI, which is a deficient one. Both of these probably might correct the current scenario of flawed GDP deflator methodology in order to move towards accuracy in our economic activity and its measurement. In this particular article, we will discuss upon what is referred to as competition within a free market economy, and particularly when it is referring to the digital economy, what you see is the lack of competition and the entire market being captured by very few big giants within this particular digital sphere. It is this which is the focus of this particular article. As you see, this article is important from this particular aspect of role of regulation in curbing any kind of monopolistic practices, and what are those fundamental principles which in fact govern these competition in any free market economy. So, this article is important from GS paper 3, impact of liberalization on Indian economy perspective, and we shall look into that particular aspect of competition within Indian economy. Look at this previous year question. Examine the impact of liberalization on companies owned by Indians. Are they competing with the MNCs satisfactorily? Discuss. Asked in 2013, this is so clearly in tune with the examination requirements. Look at this particular context. We know that there are few app developers, and these app developers have gone before the Competition Commission of India, where they have complained that Google is exploiting its dominant position. By exploiting its dominant position in the system of Android and also the Play Store ecosystem, it is drawing upon what is called as predatory trade practices or commercial practices. Now, we have one particular important fact. As we know that if you look at top 7 listed companies in the world, where they have a market value over and above $1 trillion. Remember, 6 of them are digital conglomerates. This makes it so pertinent for us to identify the fact that competition is fundamental in this particular digital economic sphere. Moving ahead, what are those fundamental issues or concerns or even the problems that we have within the digital economy? We shall look into this in terms of certain principled stance. Initially, we must remember that Indian economy particularly was a command and control based economy, where we know that state had the predominant position and predominant role in the Indian economy, and we used to refer to this as closed economy. On the other hand, if you take into consideration any of the economies across the world, particularly from the developed West, you see that they are what is called as free market economies. So, within the free market economy, what you see is competition, and within the state regulated what is called as command economy, what you see is the monopolization of the state, because it believes that the competition within a free market economy is creating the conditions of inequality and injustice. Giving predominance to this particular principled requirement, some of the economies have gone for what is called as command and control systems, where the state monopolization would fundamentally address this problem of inequality and injustice within the economic sphere. Now, what you see is even within the what is called as free market economy, where competition must prevail, you see that the tendencies of monopolization are occurring and have emerged, particularly in digital sphere. And whenever such situation emerges, there must be a legal framework which governs such situation and addresses these monopolistic tendencies or practices. Now, in order to do this, then it is raising this new debate of whether we should go for free market economy or should we involve state regulation. As we clearly see, whenever there is failure of market in order to prevent any kind of practice which is anti-competition, then there is a defined role that has to be there, where state in order to make sure that this regulation is occurring. And hence, whenever, as I said, free market economy or the competition is failing and creating the monopolistic tendencies, state must regulate, and accordingly we have what is called as Competition Act. Hitherto, Indian economy, when it was under the system of command and control, we had what is called as MRTP Act, which we refer to what is called as monopolistic and restrictive trade practices Act 1961. And this particular act, as we already know, is suitable for this command and control system. As we move towards this situation of liberalized economy, this had to be replaced with any law which governs and promotes competition within the economy, because during the competition alone there would be efficiency in both production and consumption, and hence accordingly we have come up with Competition Act 2002. In this, what Competition Act does is not only protect the interests of the producers through this form of competition, but also protect the interest of the consumers by addressing any scenarios of monopolistic tendencies or restrictive trade practices, such that both producers through competition and consumers in terms of better pricing or ideal pricing, they would benefit, and this creates that win-win situation within the free market economy. And accordingly, the Competition Act has what is called as antitrust provisions. The current scenario wherein this complaint has been filed in terms of this antitrust provisions is in fact violating the consumer's interests. Why? When your predominant position in this ecosystem of Android or Play Store is being misutilized as alleged by these companies, it would in fact have an adverse impact on the consumers ultimately, because this creates a higher pricing for these end consumers. It is this which had to be prevented. Moreover, this Competition Act 2002 is built upon certain fundamental principles. One such fundamental principle which in fact promotes competition is that it must not allow any kind of anti-competitive agreement, whereby if there are 2 or 3 producers or service providers are coming together in order to create a conducive economy, conducive market for them alone through such agreement, then this has to be prevented, whereby this might create a conditions whereby only 2 or 3 of these companies would become monopolies in the economy. In general, this particular principle is not applicable to infrastructure sector, where you need a company which has in fact reached what is called as that economy of scale, whereby they can really sustain themselves even when they know that the particular infrastructure sector will have, in order to give them certain commercial benefits, what is called as long gestation period. With respect to digital economies, with respect to those digital forms which are in fact in focus now, these anti-competitive agreements as a clause must be applicable, because as you see that the Meta would be in agreement with some other giant, and the Amazon would be in agreement with some other giant, and as you see that they are creating conditions which are suitable for themselves, and whenever any small company is raising, it is being swallowed upon by these particular companies. And clearly the creator of ChatGPT, that is OpenAI, is one such example you already have. Moreover, the abuse of dominance as another principle must be getting or gaining dominance over the entire market, over all the competitors. We must ensure that this dominance is not leading to what is called as predatory systems of commercial practices. Moreover, lastly, whenever there are mergers or amalgamations or acquisitions, then there has to be a regulatory control over any such possibility, whereby it is not leading to creation of monopolistic practices that kills the competition within the economy. Given these particular principles and given the scenario which is seen in the digital sphere, what are those various possibilities we have, whereby we can make sure that this digital economy is free from such practices? One, we must focus upon the strict implementation of Consumer Rights Protection Act, whereby consumer rights, not only as part of Competition Act but also as part of Consumer Protection Act, they must be provided with the entire protection from the scenario of possibilities of higher pricing or the possibilities of creating what is called as monopolies in the economy. Secondly, there need to be the requirement of what is called as regulatory intervention, whereby this Competition Commission of India must make sure that any such scenario of antitrust possibilities must be addressed. Third, this is not just limited to Indian economy, because this is pertaining to the digital economy which is spread across the globe. The global cooperation in addressing such concerns is very much required. One such example that we have is that this equalization levy that is being thought about by the global economies, particularly through G20. This has been debated, and the implementation is one of the aspects of these requirements of global cooperation. Then whatever the implementation that will be done in terms of regulatory practices, that must be tech neutral. And lastly, this antitrust enforcement throughout the globe against these digital economies in a rational manner in order to promote what is called as competition within the free market through the intervention of the state must be promoted and implemented. It is this which brings about parity of the implementation of competition as part of free market economy across the various economies, such that most of the economies who are thinking that they are being subjected to predatory practices by these big giants would also be part of what is called as competition within this free market economy across the global economy. Moving to the last article, we will discuss this article titled "The Countdown to a Pandemic Treaty." Just recall the times of COVID and what every individual has gone through. You know that their livelihood was at a complete halt, because of which their incomes were at a halt, and because of also which we see that they faced lot of concerns not just in India but also across the globe, and particularly this is true for all those low income economies. In the context of this, as you see, the health and the pandemic scenario with regard to the health might become a huge challenge in future when any such pandemic such as COVID pandemic is hitting the global society. This particular article is looking into the possibilities of global health governance through a treaty under the aegis of our current UN organization, that is World Health Organization. We will look into the details. This particular article is significant for the mains examination, particularly from GS2 point of view, where this can either be asked as part of what is called as the governance mechanism within India as influenced by this particular pandemic treaty which has been drafted and which is being negotiated, and on the other hand, if this particular treaty comes into fruition, then this is going to be significant from IR point of view also, where these bilateral or regional or global groupings or agreements which have been arrived at and their influence on India, effect on India, or involving the role of India with respect to these agreements can be part of your question. Moving ahead, look at these two previous year questions which can give you a clarity over why this article is important for your exam. Look at this question asked in 2020. COVID-19 pandemic accelerated class inequalities and poverty in India. Comment. As you see this reality, you see that this is true with respect to any low income economy, and if you see this with respect to developed economies on the one hand and developing economies on the other hand, it definitely has created these inequalities. Given these inequality as a challenge, governing global health is a prominent challenge for any international institution. Hence this particular question. Look at the other question which again has been asked in 2020 itself. Critically examine the role of WHO in providing global health security during the COVID-19 pandemic. As you see that these negotiations actually have begun in 2020. It is in this context alone this question has been asked. And we also know that there was a complete breakdown of the health systems everywhere, including the developed economies, because of the pandemic. It is this particular previous questions which clearly tells you that this article is completely in tune with the UPSC examination requirements. We will now look into the details. Now, as you see that since 2020, where these 25 nations have come together to negotiate a pandemic related treaty which would govern the health systems across the globe, have commenced their negotiations in 2020, as we know this. And we are now into the 9th leg of such meeting, which is in fact the final meeting of this particular body, referred to as INB shortly, that is Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. This is something similar to what you had as IPCC during the climate related negotiations. And this particular negotiation is on the possibility of a pandemic agreement, and this pandemic agreement will govern all those three aspects of any kind of health emergency. Number one, how will you prevent it? Number two, how are you prepared towards it in case it is affecting? And number three, what is your response when it has already infected and impacted across the globe? It is this which is being negotiated. Moving ahead, now let us look into some of those basic features of the pandemic treaty which is being planned, which is being drafted and trying to be agreed upon. The first feature is that significantly what we saw before the pandemic and also after the pandemic is that WHO has no more seen as a global governing body with respect to health systems. The fractures within the international health system in the form of such institution were clearly visible because it was unable to command the nations which had the possibility of having surpluses in terms of health requirements, medical devices, or even the diagnostic tools, whatever you refer to, they were not being supplied upon wherever there was need, which clearly brings you this issue of inequality and this impact of inequality over accessing such health benefits. It is in this particular manner, and there is another context to it. We know that from WHO, particularly USA, has withdrawn, and as it has withdrawn, it started facing the funding related concerns. Whenever the finances have been crippled, its ability to perform will also get crippled. Amidst these twin challenges, now what we see is WHO is able to command these negotiations. Under the aegis of WHO, these negotiations have continued for 9 such rounds in spite of certain differences, as it is able to do it. And as we see that this agreement or draft text is saying that WHO must be recognized as fundamental to strengthening pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. This is going to really do well for international law, not just with respect to health, that can be with respect to labor, that can be with respect to education, or that can be even with respect to the financial situation of developing economies and comparison with the developed economies. It is in this sense, it is going to be a watershed movement for the entire international law. This is the first thing. Second, we also know that this particular draft agreement is trying to adhere to the fundamental right which has been enunciated in the charter of WHO, that is enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health as one of the fundamental rights of every human being. Third, this also recognizes the fact that whenever there is international spread of disease, then it is going to be a global threat. That means no one is spared. That might be even an individual from a developed economy who seemingly is protecting himself thoroughly from any such particular threat. In spite of that scenario, he will not also be spared whenever it is becoming a international concern or international spread. Fourth, there are certain shortcomings in the preparedness. Whenever there is a health emergency which has been seen in the news, you clearly understand that that emergency has emerged because there was no proper preparedness. It is this which has to be understood. So, this preparedness at national and global levels, and this preparedness with respect to timely and effective prevention, and whenever you are unable to prevent and it gets detected, so even with respect to detection, and then even when it is impacting in terms of response to such health emergency, there has to be a cleared preparedness. Moreover, there are, as we have already seen, that there are gross inequities even if you take into consideration a national scenario or even if you take into consideration an international scenario. And whenever there is such gross inequity, then it is impossible to find what is called as timely and equitable access to either medical aid or any other pandemic related products. Moreover, there is a critical role that has to be identified. This critical role of whom? This critical role of the government and the whole of society. What do we understand by whole of the government and whole of the society? Health cannot be seen as a broken department within the government. Health needs support from each and every ministry, each and every division within the government, whereby it can be catered to in multiple dimensions. For example, if you look at the public works department, then the public works department must make note of the pandemic related concerns and what actually has caused this pandemic to spread. For example, as you see that the offices were very close enough, you did not have the enough space to maintain the distance such that you are away from this person who has been impacted with COVID-19, and even when he is sneezing, you are not impacted by it. As you see that the spacing is low, it has impacted many people because of such causes of spread, and these causes of spread leading to impacting or infecting the persons who do not have this particular strain as infection within him. Given this scenario, the public works department can work over what is called as making the infrastructure resilient to such pandemics. It is this which had to be taken care of. Hence, this whole of government scenario or approach is required. Similarly, whole of society approach is also required, where clearly equity and access are maintainable amongst various sections of the society. Moreover, there is a requirement of political commitment if all of these had to be achieved, and then alone you can have a built and strengthened resilient health systems across the globe, irrespective of whether it is a low income economy or high income economy. Moreover, there is also a necessity in technical terms of what is called as strengthening surveillance for pathogens, whereby you are achieving what is called as your resilience against the possibility of pandemic potential of such or through such pathogens. Lastly, you also have the commitment to better manage the antimicrobial resistance and strengthen your cell systems and sanitation, whereby you can make progress towards what is called as universal health coverage, where no one is left out of such health systems that have been created. And lastly, whenever this becomes a issue of global health governance, because this is all about the pandemic and no one can be spared out of this pandemic, then any country or any nation state which has seen any kind of health emergency, rather than hiding them, rather than underreporting them, they must come up with transparent and fully reporting of what is called as such health emergencies. Now, in order to make sure that this happens, there has to be a governance structure. This governance structure must be in the form of conference of parties according to this particular draft treaty, such that the implementation of this agreement can be overseen, incorporating all these features. However, there are few concerns that we have with respect to this pandemic treaty. The first one is the major issue of what is called as divide between developed nations and developing countries. This particular aspect is because of one fundamental scenario. The obligations and the responsibilities aspects the draft treaty is talking about have certain what is called as divisions, or have certain provisions which has created certain divisions among both of these nations. There are three fundamental things that we have to keep in mind with respect to the health requirements. One is diagnostics, second one is therapeutics, then the third one is pharmaceuticals. As you see that these three become essential components of the health systems, the governance must focus upon three of these aspects. However, the developed nations say and the developing nations say that they have their own concerns. For example, for developing countries, there are two fundamental problems with regard to having a complete system of diagnostics or therapeutics or pharmaceuticals, that is the finances. They do not have enough finances to go for a resilient health system within their countries. Here they need support of the developed countries. On the other hand, in order to have such resilient health systems, they must also have what is called as the requirement of technology transfer, for which the developed countries are hesitating. Third, they are hesitating to transfer these technologies, because much of these technologies have been arrived at based on the funding from the private agencies or private sector. And now these private sectors go for the claims of intellectual property rights. As these intellectual property rights have been claimed by them, it is difficult according to developed countries to transfer these technologies without having the payment of any lump sum towards these private sector industries. Given these differences are persisting between the developed countries and developing countries. However, the countries such as India, which in fact is representing the entire Southeast Asia with respect to these negotiations, because these negotiations are actually occurring between or amongst 30 important economies or countries, India says there must be clarity over what are the obligations of developed countries and developing countries with respect to this treaty, and what are those responsibilities that developed countries and developing countries must have towards each other, including towards the international agency or even towards this particular treaty, such that defining these clearly would address whatever the problems that have been seen as the negative points with respect to this particular treaty. Moreover, there is one fundamental issue that we also have, where the establishment of this global system will need sharing of information related to pathogens and the genetic code that we arrive at after genomic sequencing, whereby once you have this, then only there is possibility of ensuring equitable access to the benefits that we derive from the research, because this has to be shared amongst all the countries, because you cannot be spared when there is a pandemic, even when you are from developed economy. This we have to keep in mind, whereby this benefit must also be pertaining to the vaccines which have been approved. Hence, there is a system that this particular treaty has created, which is referred to as WHO Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System. This is primarily an international treaty related system which has been created, whereby this has been made into what is called as mandatorily reporting system, whereby each and every country, be it developing or developed, they have to report any kind of information that they have with regard to pathogens, and hence accordingly benefit sharing can also be decided. However, the major concern here is that how will you try to make sure that globally this can be governed, enforced, and also made into what is called as the requirement of accountability. If I am asking someone to share the pathogen related information or the genomic sequencing that is done, we clearly know that much of the times, apart from the state, private sector is also involved. They are doing it for the purpose of earning the commercial interest, and here we must keep in mind that it is this R&D investment which they have made, according to them, must give them certain benefit, and hence IPR rights will be granted to them in order to gain such benefit when they are the ones who are innovating it. Given this, there is a challenge of meeting hence the requirement of low income economies, meeting the requirement of private sector from the developed countries, which according to them are the ones who are creating or innovating these requirements, and how will you bring about parity between these two is the major question, and hence this becomes a governance related problem, enforcement related problem, and accountability related problem. If we address this, this treaty is going to do good for the international system, not only from the perspective of health scenario, but also from the perspective of any social good that you may refer to. Having completed the discussion over the articles, we shall now move to this section of practice questions. Take this prelims practice question. The first question: consider the following statements regarding general trend for credit growth in India. There is a rise in the bank credit towards industry in the last 1 year. The first statement, which is a correct statement. Second, rise in the bank credit to various sectors increases demand and employment opportunities. As you see that both of these are correct, answer has to be C. Moving to the second question, consider the following statements regarding general trend for credit growth in India. The non-performing asset ratio of scheduled commercial banks has dropped gradually in the last 1 decade, which is a right statement. Second, the share of public sector banks in the consolidated balance sheet of banks declined while private banks have gained a share last year, which is also a correct statement, and hence answer has to be C again. Move to the third question. The first statement, real gross domestic product measures the value of all finished goods and services produced by a country at their current market prices. No, this is the incorrect statement because it is produced at the or measured at the constant prices. Nominal gross domestic product reflects the value of all goods and services produced by an economy in a given year, but adjusted for changes in price, which is also a false statement, and hence both of these statements are false. Hence answer has to be D for this particular question. Move to the fourth question. Consider the following statements regarding World Health Organization's global pandemic treaty, which is in discussion now. First statement, it came into existence in 2021 amidst COVID-19 pandemic. Remember, it is just in the discussion stage yet, and hence we have to consider this as an incorrect statement. Second, definition of pandemic involve the criteria of limited or no immunity and high transmissibility from person to person. Which of the above statements are correct? A, one only, B, two only, C, both of them, D, none of the above. As we clearly see that it is the second statement which is correct, answer has to be B for this particular question. Consider the following statements regarding the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958. First statement, the act allows security forces to conduct searches without a warrant in declared disturbed areas, which is right. Judicial review is permitted for the government's decision to declare an area as disturbed. The third statement, both the union government and state governments have the authority to declare an area as disturbed. Hence, answer has to be for this, what is referred to as 1 and 3 only, because the judicial review is not permitted in these particular cases. Moving to the mains practice question. Digital technologies have advanced more rapidly than any innovation in our history. In the light of this statement, examine the concerns associated with the big tech firms and their monopolies. This particular question is for 150 words and 10 marks. You can write an introduction where you can say that the advancement of digital technologies, which is being referred to as big tech, which involve particularly those very few companies such as Google or this Alphabet, as it has been renamed now, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, etc. These have attained monopoly in the market. Introduce this and then you may write in the body whereby you can say that there are certain issues or concerns with regard to these big tech firms, particularly the discretionary pricing that they follow, or regulatory vacuum that is present, and the unfair competition that they are promoting, and along with this issue of data privacy. Now you can say that as a way forward, there is a requirement of regulation of this particular digital market price. Then there is a requirement of ensuring neutrality. Third, there is a requirement of transparency and accountability. Then the data privacy and also price monitoring. All of these have to be subjected to accurate and efficient regulation. By this, you may end the answer, and that would be giving you a good marks with respect to this particular question. I hope you have enjoyed this particular discussion. If you like this particular discussion, please like, share and comment on the video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS, the one-stop destination for all of your UPSC Civil Service examination requirements. Thank you one and all. We again meet tomorrow with new edition of Daily News Analysis. Thank you.